Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jessie Brandt, Director of Programs and Operations for the Global Wellness Summit and Institute. Welcome to the Wellness Economy Research webinar. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from if you haven't so. Before we start, here's some quick logistics. Feel free to select speaker or gallery view, and please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. I will mute everyone shortly. And researchers, please unmute yourself before you start talking. If you can, please turn on your camera. It's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Davis, our Chief Operating Officer and Executive Director, who will moderate today's program. Nancy, good morning. Over to you.
Thank you, Jessie, and welcome everyone to the Wellness Economy Research webinar with the Senior Fellows at the Global Wellness Institute, Catherine Johnston and Ophelia Young. The topic today is the global wellness economy itself, and the latest data released at the Global Wellness Summit in St. Andrews just a little over a month ago. I could wax poetic on the incredible impact GWI research has had on the wellness industry and really beyond the wellness industry, led by Catherine and Ophelia, but I'd rather give them as much time as possible. They will share some pretty exciting information, clear evidence of the momentum we are feeling in the wellness industry. There are also over 800 people registered for this webinar, further evidence, I think, of that momentum. And we want to get to some of your questions today, so we're leaving time for that. And I'll have a few instructions about the Q&A in just a bit. In the meantime, please use the chat function to share your thoughts, links, and questions. The chat is important since you will receive it as part of the follow-up email. It's my pleasure now to turn this over to Catherine Johnston and Ophelia Young. Ladies?
Hello, everyone. So I'll get started right away. So I am pretty sure all of you who are here have been following our research and know that we had new numbers that we released in November at the Global Wellness Summit in Scotland. And for those of you who have been following this number over the years, you would know that we used to be releasing them only every other year in the past. But now, by popular demand, we will be updating this data every year. So it's pretty exciting for us too. So today, our presentation will be separated into two parts. Part one, we will dive into the numbers a bit, which sectors are the growth leaders and which ones are lagging a bit. And then part two, we will have a little discussion on how to interpret these global wellness sector numbers, what they mean and what they may not represent. So let's jump right into it. Usually we like to just show the bubble chart from the previous year to remind you what was the number the previous year, and it was $5.6 trillion when we released this number in 2023. So this is a 2022 number. And so, you know, when we released our research in November, we unveiled our $6.3 trillion wellness economy. And so this is the size. This is $1 trillion, a very big number. Just how big? To give you some context, the wellness economy is much larger than the pharmaceuticals industry. It is more than double the size of the sports industry. And you may be surprised that it is larger than tourism, the so-called green economy, and the IT industry. Wellness is also about 60% of the size of all global healthcare expenditures.
Okay, so I'll take over now. And, you know, of course, you can see the wellness economy is massive, but it has also consistently grown at a very rapid pace, which you're seeing on the bar charts here. Now, as you can see, wellness was growing by more than 3 times faster than global GDP in the years leading up to the pandemic, and that's the kind of light gray, light blue bar there. Now, as we all know, in 2020, which is depicted by that orange bar, the wellness economy took a big hit. Wellness economy fell by 3 times more than GDP fell just in that one year. But the amazing thing is that after that initial drop, wellness economy has bounced back incredibly rapidly. As of 2023, the wellness economy is now 26% larger than it was prior to the pandemic. Wellness now accounts for more than 6% of GDP worldwide. Now, of course, these are the big numbers. You all know the bubble chart and that we have 11 different sectors that are underneath that big wellness economy umbrella. Those sectors are very diverse. They have seen very different trends since the pandemic. And so what we're going to do now is just spend a few minutes drilling down on each of the sectors. And instead of going through each one individually, which would take forever, we've grouped them so that we can focus on some of their longer term growth trajectories and what's driving them. And of course, you'll see lots of numbers on the screen, and you can also access those in the report on our website. So the first group I want to look at are three sectors that have by far been the biggest growth leaders in the wellness economy. Now, the growth rates you're seeing on the screen there are average annual growth rates, and they cover the period 2019 to 2023. Now, you can see for all three of these sectors, wellness real estate, mental wellness, and public health prevention and personalized medicine, they have had extremely high growth rates that have been between 10 to 20% per year, which is incredible from an economics perspective. Now, what all three of these sectors have in common is that they had uninterrupted growth throughout the pandemic. They did not shrink in 2020. And these have really grown even faster because of the pandemic. So, for example, wellness real estate has nearly doubled in size since 2019. It's now at 438 billion. Mental wellness has grown by 1.5 times, and it's now at 233 billion. Now, for both of those sectors, those rapid growth rates are really reflecting kind of a sea change in people's understanding of wellness and what it means in their lives. So, we're no longer thinking about wellness just in terms of going out to exercise or eating well or dieting or going to a spa. People are really starting to understand and embrace a broader viewpoint that recognizes the importance of the environments around us and how those affect both our mental and emotional and our physical well-being. The other sector in orange, public health prevention and personalized medicine, that has now reached $781 billion, which is very large. That is 75% larger than it was in 2019. Now, this is really because of the pandemic. This sector, the spending took a massive jump in 2020 alone, which you can see on the bar chart. That was from governments and health systems, both public and private, ramping up their spending on public health in response to COVID-19, of course. You can see in the chart that this spending has remained high over the last couple of years, but that growth rate really has leveled off. So it'll be interesting to see whether this stays high or shrinks back as we get further away from the pandemic. So next we have four sectors, and all four of these we would say are characterized by resilience and steady growth. Now, all four of these sectors have been growing from around 3% to 5% annually since 2019. Three of these on the screen are the largest sectors in the wellness economy, so the biggest bubbles you see in our bubble chart. And all three of those large ones are pretty close in size. So those would be personal care and beauty, which is in the bright green color. That's the largest sector. That's 1.2 trillion in 2023. Healthy eating is in the dark green. That's the second largest sector in the wellness economy. It's at 1.1 trillion in 2023. And then the third largest is physical activity, and that was 1.06 trillion in 2023. The other sector we have here in orange is traditional and complementary medicine. That's a bit smaller than the other three. It was just over $500 billion in 2023. So just a few things to point out about all of these sectors. First of all of these do tend to go up and down with consumer spending patterns and with disposable incomes. So total global consumer expenditures on everything grew by 4.4% annually over the last 4 years. So you can see from the growth rates that all of these sectors pretty much tracked or even slightly lagged the consumer spending growth trends. Now, a second thing is about these is these can all be discretionary purchases most of the time for consumers. So what that means is when people feel positive, when they feel like they have a lot of disposable income, they can and do spend more in these categories. But when the economy is not feeling so good, these are areas where people can and do easily cut back. And then a third important thing to consider here is that price inflation is a very big factor in all of these sectors. Now, we all know in the last few years, it's been an inflationary period. Prices have gone up for everything, for food, for personal care products, for gym memberships. So, some of the growth that we see in these sectors is really just people paying more for the purchases rather than an actual increase in what people are buying. Okay, next we have two sectors, wellness, tourism, and spas. Now, both of these are closely tied to the overall tourism industry, and they very much depend on tourists. As we know, global tourism was decimated during the pandemic. It has taken a long time for the tourism industry to recover worldwide. 2023 was actually the first year that both wellness tourism and spas have fully recovered and have exceeded their pre-pandemic levels, which you can see in the bar charts here. Wellness tourism is now at $830 billion, and wellness tourism expenditures are now 19% higher than they were before the pandemic. In the spa industry, spa revenues are now at $137 billion, and that's 18% higher than pre-pandemic. Now, just to give you a comparison for these, overall global tourism spending has just barely recovered to its 2019 levels. As of last year, it was only 1% above where it was pre-pandemic. So you can see from the numbers that both of these sectors have actually fared much better than the overall tourism industry has in terms of recovery. And these are our last two sectors. These two are the ones that have not yet fully recovered from the effects of the pandemic. So we'll talk about these separately. Thermal and mineral springs in orange is an interesting sector because this particular one is so dominated by what is going on in China and Japan. Those two countries account for half of the entire global market for thermal and mineral springs. So they're very important to the overall growth trends. In China, their hot spring sector had not yet recovered as of 2023. In Japan, the country has had a lot of currency depreciation, and so its hot spring sector has actually recovered when we measure it in yen, but because of the depreciation, it has not recovered in US dollars. So it's a little bit of a tricky economic thing to understand. The European market is also very big in this sector. A lot of the large European hot springs countries also had not fully recovered last year. And so that's the reason why this overall market was still down globally as of 2023. Now, if we take China, Japan, and Europe out of these numbers, the rest of the world has actually been growing by 5.5% annually, so has been doing really well in springs. And you'll find in our report a few more details about those numbers and those breakouts. And then the last sector in blue is workplace wellness. It is still just slightly below where it was pre-pandemic. You might find that surprising because clearly this has been a big growing area of focus for many companies. So why don't we see bigger growth in terms of the numbers? There are a couple of big reasons for that. First, there's just the reality that all around the world, gig work, temp work, contract jobs, informal employment, all of those types of working have been growing all over the world. So what that means is that there's actually a shrinking portion of the global workforce that is in the types of jobs that could even have access to workplace wellness. The second factor is that the companies that are offering wellness programs for their employees, many of them are increasingly shifting to more holistic approaches, things that are really more impactful for people and have a bigger wellness benefit. Those would be things like job flexibility, better paid leave, healthy office features. I mean, there are all kinds of holistic ways of helping our employees' well-being. And these are the types of things that we can't really measure as workplace wellness programs or workplace wellness spending because they're more holistic to the company's operations. So there is actually a lot of growth and a lot of development and dynamism in the workplace wellness sector. It's just not growth that we can really measure in dollar signs. So now let's jump to looking at the future. And just to wrap up looking at all the 11 sectors, you can see in the chart here, these are our projected growth rates for the next 5 years. So that's 2023 to 2028. Growth will continue to be led by the wellness real estate sector in purple and by mental wellness. Both of those sectors we project to continue expanding by more than 10% per year over the next 5 years. So if you're looking for investment opportunities, I would say those would be a great place to put your money. Now, all of the sectors are growing at a pretty rapid pace. 10 out of the 11 we project will be growing faster than global GDP during this time period. So, this is an interesting year for us with the data because at this point, we've actually been looking and studying at the wellness economy and putting out numbers for 10 years. So we have a whole decade worth of data to look at. Here you can see the full time series and just the phenomenal rise and growth of the wellness economy over that time period. Back when we've put out the first numbers for 2013, wellness economy was estimated at 3.4 trillion. So it has nearly doubled after 10 years to that $6.3 trillion figure in 2023. Looking out to the future, we're projecting 7.3% annual growth, and so it would reach just under $9 trillion by 2028. Now, the reason for this growth is that all of the underlying things and the factors that are driving it are just becoming more and more pervasive and more compelling than ever. Survey after survey all around the world is showing that consumers are increasingly seeing wellness as a primary driver for all of their decision making, and it has very much become a dominant consumer value all around the world.
So here it is, our updated bubble chart that is so familiar to all of you. And clearly $6.3 trillion, that's a very big number. And this large market and growth potential, it's all very exciting and encouraging for wellness businesses and their investors. So we're coming to part 2 of our presentation, which is, what do these numbers mean? Are they really connected to real wellness? Because as economists, we are often measuring these numbers. We are often asked these questions. Are people more well now that we're spending so much money on it? Actually, on a global scale, when we look at the different metrics, I mean, this is sort of like a depressing, these are kind of depressing data, but when we look at different numbers that measure our well-being, whether it's physical, mental, social, or environmental, the answer sadly is no in most of them, and some of them are getting worse. So why do we have this discrepancy that as the wellness economy is growing, why is the world and our health and well-being not getting better? The reason is it is very tricky to determine what to count as part of the wellness economy and whether that spending is actually related to real wellness. So let's take healthy eating as an example. Everyone would agree that healthy eating is an essential part of wellness. So of course, it is part of the wellness economy. But who gets to decide what is a healthy diet? Some people say it's keto, pescatarian, or plant-based. And what about caffeine or sugar? Is sugar substitute better or worse? So these and many other questions have very little agreement in the market and even among experts. So there are many questions remain on how we should eat to be healthy. So healthy eating is a $1.1 trillion sector as we measured it. But what are we measuring here? We're including things like vitamins and supplements and food and beverages that are labeled as healthy. So these are the things that are marketed as low fat, low sugar, or they're fortified with added nutrients or high in fiber, protein, probiotics, and so on. Now, I'm not going to lie here because a lot of these are considered processed foods, which many people would argue is not healthy. And we do not include in our measurement big food groups like fresh fruits and vegetables, fish and seafood, nuts and beans, even though these can be a core part of a healthy diet. Now, why don't we include those food groups? Because even in these categories, it is not so simple. Whether they are healthy or not depend on how these foods are cooked and prepared, the portion sizes, and many other factors. So, let's say a nut, we look at nuts. A nut eaten on its own is very different from a nut eaten in a candy bar, or a nut that is laced, or it's laced with sugar or other additives. And even if that candy bar is not considered healthy, most nutritionists would say it is fine to consume occasional sweets, as long as they're eaten in moderation and in the context of an otherwise healthy diet. So you can see it is a very challenging thing to measure what is the healthy eating sector. And so our $1.1 trillion figure is not exactly a measurement of whether we are collectively eating a healthy diet. It is best viewed as an indication of consumer interests, our hopes and desires to have a healthy diet, or to correct our unhealthy diet and lifestyles. So a related question is, does spending more money on wellness make us healthier? So the answer is both yes and no. So let's turn to physical activity as an example. It is another one of the trillion-dollar industry, wellness economy. And this number includes the spending on doing physical activities, along with related equipment, shoes, clothing, and technology. So it captures the money we spend when we pay for a gym membership, or go to a Pilates class, or subscribe to a fitness app. But we all know people who have Peloton bikes or rotting in their basement, or buy expensive gym membership as a New Year resolution, but then stop going after a couple of months. So paying for a gym membership does not mean we're actually exercising, but that's what we're measuring. And in fact, this low attendance rate in fitness centers is already factored into the business model of many fitness clubs. And if a person does activities like doing plaza dancing or Tai Chi in the park or go running, then our numbers would only capture these activities if the practitioners and the participants paid for new running shoes or athletic clothing in that year. Now, from our research, we know that spending on physical activity has been going up after a dip during the pandemic. But we also know that on a global level, the rate of recreational physical activity is stagnant or going down. And in many places, it has not fully bounced back from the pandemic. So how is spending going up when the activity levels are not? Well, clearly the people who do exercise are spending more money to do so. So the growth in the physical activity sector economy does not mean that people are exercising more, or that more people are exercising. And another question we get asked is, these things that we buy, do they work? And here's what I usually tell them. There is plenty of evidence on the basics, which we all already know. We need to move our bodies, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat less fast foods or processed food, get enough sleep, lower our stress, spend time in nature, and invest in our relationships and live with purpose and meaning. But the evidence on everything else that is being sold in the wellness world, maybe not so much. And as we know, in most countries in the United States, food and drinks and supplements and personal care products are not regulated like pharmaceuticals. So products can make pretty liberal wellness claims. And today there is so much anxiety about our poor diet, stress level, our immune system, gut health, brain health, skin health, even scalp health, that it is very easy to promote any kind of supplements or fortified foods or lotions and IVs to consumers, especially by wellness influencers and celebrities, whether there is solid evidence on what they claim to do or not. So the question is, if some of these products don't work, but if people think they do, or because of the placebo effect, or people feel better because they took some action that they think will improve their health, what is the harm in that? Well, it can still be harmful, because if people think there is a quick fix that give them a pass, they may actually not make the healthy choices that they need to. And worse, this quick fix mentality may enable risky behaviors. Like if people think that they can drink excessively because in the morning they can get a quick IV drip that will fix it all, and then they can go back to work or to school as new. And the harm is even greater for people who don't even have the money to begin with, but spend it on dubious products and services anyway. So when we look at this $6.3 trillion industry, it is fair to ask who is buying the wellness and who we're leaving behind. And in some wellness sectors, the market is a reflection or a result of where governments and communities are falling short. We'll take wellness real estate as an example. What if all of us already live in a place where the water and our air, they're clean, and our building materials are not toxic, where we all have access to nature, and we can have a safe and welcoming public spaces, and then we have facilities that are free or very affordable to exercise in the community. In that case, would there be as much interest or as many consumers who would want to pay millions of dollars to live in a wellness real estate bubble? Clearly, leaving wellness in the market is not equitable, because not everybody has the money to pay for it. In fact, most people do not.
So we believe that this really needs to be a watershed moment for the wellness industry and for the business leaders who are all part of it. We all need to recognize the fact that, that $6.3 trillion wellness economy cannot spend its way to wellness for all, because it is leaving so many people behind. As we know, the wealth gap and the income gap and inequities have been widening all around the world for some time now. Now, in the wellness world, that is reflected in the offerings that are becoming ever more luxurious and exclusive and personalized and expensive. Now, we need to think about this reality too, that the people who can already pay for things like $10,000 wellness retreats, $40,000 gym memberships, multi-million-dollar luxury wellness residences, premium beauty products, or high-tech longevity medicine, the people who are buying those things already have access to the best healthcare. They are already living in the cleanest and safest environments, and they already have longer lifespans as compared to the people who cannot afford to pay for those things. So the reality is that the marginal benefit of these kinds of premium wellness offerings for the top 1% or 0.1% of the population is pretty much minuscule. This is not going to move the needle on our global health and well-being challenges. Now, instead, let's imagine what the impacts would be if we invested some of our 6 trillion wellness dollars into things like clean air and clean water, basic health care, preventive care, or public infrastructure like parks, sidewalks, green spaces, and libraries, things that can be accessible to everyone. So all of us really need to be shifting our focus to not just be wellness industry leaders, but to thinking about how can we truly become leaders in wellness. Now, how do we do that? Well, at GWI, we, over the last few years, have been exploring and introduced the concept of wellness policy. This is a report series that we launched 2 years ago, and it focuses on government actions that can help to create supportive environments for everyone's health and well-being. Now, this series is not just for governments. We don't have to sit back and wait for the government to take action on wellness. That rarely happens, and it will take a long time. But the reality is that every single one of us, whether we're as individuals, in our communities, as nonprofits, and as businesses, all of us can advocate for wellness policies, and all of us can be partners in implementing these. So that would be things like investing in wellness infrastructure that will benefit everyone, supporting research on the efficacy of various wellness modalities and products, and also helping to protect our important wellness assets, things like nature, water, biodiversity, and indigenous cultures. Now, if you're interested in this topic, you can find our wellness policy report and various toolkits on our website for free. We've already released 3 toolkits that focus on particular dimensions of wellness. Those are on physical activity, wellness and tourism, and mental wellness. And we have other topics that we'll be rolling out in the future. So just to wrap up, before we move to Q&A, we truly encourage all of you who are owning and running wellness businesses to lead with wellness. Do not just work to improve the wellness of your customers, but work to infuse wellness into everything you do. So that includes things like how you treat your employees, how you treat your suppliers and the communities you're working in, your energy practices and your sustainability practices, and your water practices. So as we look to the future, we really should all be filled with a sense of responsibility to grow the wellness economy and to grow it not only in dollars, but in impact so that we can bring more wellness to more people in the communities that we're not reaching yet. So with that, we're going to end the presentation, and we've left the second half of the call for questions and answers. We know everyone loves the data, and we know there are always lots of questions about the numbers. So we thought this would be a nice opportunity for people to ask those burning questions. And I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy and Jesse to help moderate. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Ophelia. Incredible work and very thought-provoking presentation, I have to say. I think, it isn't just numbers anymore that you're talking about, and it's a real challenge to everybody to work to improve wellness. And that's amazing. So we're going to take some questions. We purposely left time because we know people love to ask questions. I'm going to ask that you raise your virtual hand, as Professor Paul has done, and wait until I call on you. And when I do, please unmute, and you've got 30 seconds. Just tell us your name, your company, and your question. This is not the time for a lecture or to tell us all the things you do in your life and in your world. This is really so that we can have as many questions as possible for Catherine and Ophelia. And as soon as you've asked your question, please mute yourself again. And to ask a question, we do ask that your video be turned on. Okay, Professor, over to you for first question.
Being a professor, but I will not lecture, but I do have a major global and planetary question. What do you imagine the impact of disclosure will have on the wellness economy? You're looking at 2027, and according to what's coming out now, that in terms of we have craft and bodies from non-human intelligence, what impact do you think this will have on the wellness economy? Because I think this was
okay,
probably...
Please mute yourself. We've got the question. Please
okay.
mute. Catherine
Thank
and
you.
Ophelia, who would like to answer?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What does the impact of...
The impact of non-human intelligence, what is now coming out from the Defense Department and around the world in terms of we are not alone, but the question is, who are we with in terms of our galactic neighbors? This is a global question.
This may not be a question that is in their wheelhouse to answer. Catherine, Ophelia, you want to take a stab? If not, we will move on.
Oh, I don't know if I have any input on that. Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. Is there another question? Thank you. We will send that over to our intergalactic department. No, we will hopefully that's in the chat, and maybe somebody can help answer that. Other questions for Catherine and Ophelia about the economy, about the measuring that they do. I have one that I would just like to know how you measure mental wellness. What is that? What do you measure when you measure mental wellness?
Sure, I can jump in on that. As some of you may know, mental wellness, if you go back 10 years, wellness was not a part of that bubble chart. It was a new sector that we added in 2020. We actually launched that during the pandemic year. There are a lot of reasons why it wasn't there before, why it did get added when it did. You know, as you know, when we're measuring these numbers in the bubble chart, this is a measure of an economy. So economy relates to spending, buying and purchasing goods and services. You know, and mental wellness, you know, in terms of its role in the economy, if we go back even 10 years, you know, it's people were aware of it, but it wasn't something that had a lot of goods and services and things that were purchased related to it. And that has really changed significantly in recent years. You know, just with the rapid expansion of all kinds of offerings in the wellness space for people to address their mental wellness, everything from meditation spaces to, you know, all kinds of vitamins and supplements that target our brain health, you know, all those things have been ramping up. So in 2020, we decided, okay, there's enough of an economy, there's enough buying and selling of things that this is something we can define and measure now. We spent a whole year measuring it and figuring out what it is and how to define it. So what we came up with, the simple quick explanation is that we have 4 subsectors that measure different types of products and services that are things that are supporting our mental well-being. Those 4 sectors are self-improvement, which you probably know what that is, you know, all kinds of books and workshops and speakers and coaching. We have one of the sectors is meditation and mindfulness. So again, any, you know, classes, apps, accessories, things that people are paying for to support those activities. We have a sector called I think it's brain enhancing nutraceuticals and botanicals. That's a fancy name that is capturing vitamins and supplements that are labeled as helping our brain health, our cognitive functioning, our energy, and also packaged, fortified, and functional foods and beverages that target those things. And then the 4th sector is what we call senses, spaces, and sleep, which is a big group of things that are basically aiming to help our senses. So that could be sound healing, it could be light therapy, you know, weighted blankets for touch, and then also all of the things around sleep that we all know are really expanding. So that's there's lots more details in the report if you're interested in that sector.
Okay, but that's great. Thank you so much. That's it, because that one seems a little hard to measure, but you've done a good job. Susan, can you put your video on and please ask your question?
Thank you. I'm Sue Lawler, CEO of Forest Wellness. Quick question on any data or resources on water practices, and how are you defining water practices? Thank you.
We do not, I mean, water practice is not, I mean, it's not one of our sector. So the only related one is thermal mineral springs. So yeah, so unfortunately, that's not something we follow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bob Dykstra, please unmute and ask your question.
Oh, Bob Dykstra, Life Up Studios. With all this great information, have you found any appraisal companies that actually would use it as part of the appraisals that we're going to have to do for our bankers who don't really understand wellness?
What we have heard is that our bubble chart is in the pitch deck of many you know, entrepreneurs who are pitching to investors. It is widely used, we have been told.
No, I'm talking about, are there any appraisal companies that specifically have adopted it?
That's a good question. I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, we put these reports out. We don't know always who's using it and how. So it's possible, but we haven't had anyone tell us that specifically. But again, we know that these numbers, I mean, this is actually something we talk about in the report too, that they're, you know, it's so important to have numbers on an economy or on industries, you know, not just for that reason, but for so many purposes that, you know, it's kind of immeasurable, you know, the ways that these numbers can be applied and used by people depending on what capacity.
Oh, no, I know.
they're in.
It's great. I just haven't found any specific appraisal companies that actually have embraced it, because it makes a big difference when you're trying to get financing from a bank.
Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. Chada, can you put on your video, please? Chada, on, yes. Oh, gone. Okay, Natasha.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, yes. My name is Chiari Nruka of Chikobi Health. And my question, sorry if it's a bit noisy, but my question is, we're focusing on, preventive health because, treatment right now in healthcare is reactive. So in those categories that you mentioned in the report that's in the report or in the thing in the toolkits, do you differentiate the wellness, define them as all preventive wellness, or do you consider some of those things as treatment? Because of, we're sort of leaving out those people that don't have access to that level of care.
Yeah, so just kind of as an overarching explanation about how we approach this, both conceptually and in the numbers, we always differentiate wellness as being outside of the medical system and medical treatment almost across the board. So we don't include pharmaceuticals in our numbers. We don't include, medical treatment and mental wellness. We're not including therapy or, drugs for mental health because we consider that to be part of medicine. But yes, there are areas of overlap, and I'll just point out one of the sectors where that overlap happens, and that's in that public health prevention and personalized medicine bubble, which does overlap with the medical sector. That's where we're capturing the preventive activities. So it'd be things like vaccines or education programs for public health. And yes, you are correct too that, given the failures of the conventional health system, I mean, every single thing that we're looking at in the wellness economy is becoming increasingly important and understood by the public and also even by doctors in terms of being pathways to bring prevention and to bring, proactive approaches to health to people who are being left behind and not, able to access preventive care in the messed up system that we have. So, I mean, yes, all of this is prevention in varying ways, but we wouldn't call it, we're not measuring medicine, if that makes sense.
Catherine, thank you so much. Natasha, if you would unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Great information so far. Natasha from Toronto, Canada. Mine's a little bit twofold. There are an incredible number of small business owners here. Does GWI provide us with a space where we can connect and say, I'm in wellness real estate, I'm in workplace wellness, because we've got a limited amount of time here, and for us to be focusing on your incredible data while at the same time trying to connect with anyone, where do we go to sort of team up? Because, for example, wellness real estate, if I have a meeting with someone like a global enterprise,
okay, I'm going to interrupt you just to say that I just want to get questions for Catherine and Ophelia today. If you ask that in the chat, we will give you ways. There are LinkedIn groups. We have a wellness real estate and community symposium we run, and there are ample ways to connect, and we can follow up with you. But do you have a question for Ophelia or Catherine?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Right now. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, but we will connect with you, Natasha. Ahmed,
thank you.
Go ahead if you unmute and ask your question.
Hello, good evening or good morning if it's a different timing. Where are you guys? I'm Ahmed from Dubai. Thank you guys for this phenomenal work. The number that you captured was really helpful to build multiple presentations actually. But my question is, why are we so obsessed on the numbers of purchase and people behavior and purchase, not the amount of organizations involved in wellness, not the amount of people attending wellness events to enhance their, let's say, exposure and knowledge how to manage their own well-being? Because I really believe that the essence of well-being is people actually being proactive toward it.
Okay, Catherine or Ophelia?
I mean, is your question, I'm wondering if your question is, are we including the events? Or
if possible, I'm not sure how would it, it's really difficult to measure well-being, right? But if as you mentioned, the numbers we have, it just shows us the consumerism, not the actual behavior of people.
Okay, so it's numbers, how you measure. I mean, as economists, how you do this, I think is different than what Ahmed is asking. How do you really measure behavior and change?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so that is we are very clear. That's why we're very clear to talk about what we measured, because there are organizations measuring health outcomes, on the national level and the international level. So we share some global stats. So what we specialize in is the economic activities that are associated with wellness, and sometimes, yes, economic activities are not they may exaggerate or underreport the actual behavior. And when government spends a lot of money and consumers don't have to, well, that's not captured in our numbers. So we readily admit that. So, so that is the limitation of this. So we don't know how to get around this. And then there are many things we do for our well-being that does not cost money, right? Like being spiritual or have very strong religious beliefs, friendship and spend time in nature. A lot of those things are free. So it's when we measure the wellness economy, we are kind of like trying to monetize everything, which is in a way sort of crass, and people ask questions. But it is one way to measure, and that's why we still want people to be careful and not say, we're spending all this money, look, we must be all doing better in the whole world. No, we are not necessarily, maybe a fraction of the people. So it's a good question on that.
Could you mention why this year you showed also what the value of other economies? Because I think what it does is it puts wellness, in the big leagues in terms of, industry value. And so why did you decide to do that?
I think, when we look at numbers, sometimes when a number is in the trillions, it's hard to get a sense of how big it is, because maybe as economists, we know we're in the back of our minds, what's the size of the US economy and different, some of us will have those numbers in our minds, but most people, like beyond a million, when you get to a billion and then multiply by 1,000, a trillion, you really have no scale. What is it? How big is it? So when we contrast it with, well, what do we think of like IT sector, or how much we spend on healthcare? And people then understand, because we all know we spend a lot of money on these things. So when you put wellness next to it, that kind of gives you a much better idea. Otherwise, it's really, I think it's hard to grasp what is a trillion versus a billion.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Melanie, over to you, if you unmute for your question.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Melanie Cave. I'm talking to you near Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. My question for you is, since there's a huge push, obviously, in the United States for better regulation of our natural care products, and that's going to be pretty intense over the next few years. Because due to that, are you expecting and anticipating a lot of changes, especially among the larger corporations that sell products, let's say skincare products that are laden with tons of chemicals and toxins that are not permitted to be sold in European communities, but are currently being sold in the United States? Are you expecting a huge shift, in other words, from
Okay, I think we got the question, Ophelia or Catherine? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I can jump in. I mean, given the future of what's happening in our political system, I wouldn't necessarily anticipate there are going to be huge regulations coming in right away. I mean, maybe, but obviously, companies respond to regulations. So if forced, they're going to change their formulations. I mean, the shift to clean and green and all of those things in the product sector has been happening anyway, by consumer interest and consumer demand. I mean, I think that, most people who, I mean, I'm not an expert on that particular sector per se, but I think people who are concerned about that are, they're concerns about, okay, if we're regulating this, are the clean and green approaches we're using actually better for us or not? There are legitimate questions around what's out there right now. And will it fundamentally change the industry? Maybe. Maybe not. Again, I mean, I think that, absolutely regulation is needed across so many of these sectors, as we talked about, in terms of, transparency to consumers and, being clear about efficacy and impacts of formulations or approaches. But, will it be a sea change? That's a good question.
Thank you, Catherine. Victor, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for this great experience. And I just saw from your report that the Netherlands actually ranks up there in one of those tables quite nicely. But my question is relating to also on regulation side, because I'm wondering whether you see any trends or what basically was catching your eye in terms of how companies, in terms of corporate wellness, are maneuvering in terms of good disclosure? Because in the end of the day, if wellness is an $8 trillion engagement market, do you see any remarkable trends in your work where you believe that in the relative midterm, there's actually going to be a trend or a stimulus for companies to be more open about what they do in terms of.
Okay, thank you so much. Catherine and Ophelia?
So in terms of sort of employee wellness and all companies paying attention to it, I mean, that is definitely a big shift in the on the measuring or reporting on ESG, where the the E and the S, that the focus had been on the E for a long time. Sort of, going to carbon zero or, just those sustainability practices. But there's definitely a much bigger focus and a shift toward the S side, and which is employees and communities and all the other stakeholders. So the shift is quite significant in the last few years. And I think the pandemic gave it a big push. But then you also have, countries like the US that's sort of moving backwards, moving the other direction. So it is kind of interesting to see, because recently Catherine and I had a road trip to visit a lot of wellness real estate properties in the UK. And it is pretty interesting to hear how much of that, a lot of these are office space and commercial and institutional space, and how quickly are those spaces moving toward both human health and environmental health. It's very much, it's in a reporting and a meeting regulations, but also as a corporate image. But as a lot of in the US, that's like a big backlash. So it will be interesting how it shakes out. But sort of from a competitive perspective, to attract good employees, to retain them, and to make sure they perform at the highest level, definitely, if companies and employers are working for their own interests, they really should pay a lot more attention to the employee.
Thank you, Ophelia. I'm going to get to the last two questions. I just wanted to ask, because people are from all over the world on this call, is the data, do you present data by country? Do you slice and dice this? I know you're about to release, I think, the next report in that regard, but could just take a minute and tell us about the data by country or region.
Yeah, so actually, I mean, everyone knows the Global Wellness Economy report. Monitor is our flagship report that comes out in the fall each year at the summit. That's the report we presented today. And the focus of that report is really on the sectors. We have a chapter broken down by each of the 11 bubbles in the wellness economy. In the last few years, what we've done is we've actually added a second report that talks about the same numbers, but slices them in a different way and talks about them geographically and by country. So that's called our Global Wellness Economy Country Rankings Report. The cycle for that is it comes out in January, but it's actually talking about the same data set that is in the Monitor report. So you should look for that next month. And there what we do is we have regional profiles for each Europe, Asia, and so on, all the regions in the world with some of their key stats. And then we give the global rankings for
Great. And that comes out at
countries.
the press event in New York, January 28th. And obviously that's available on our website to download without cost, like everything else. Ayana, it's over to you if you would unmute for your question.
Thank you all so much for this informative time spent. My question has to do with in-person wellness versus remote or virtual wellness, and what the research or data says about where that's going. Are we looking ahead to more in-person community-based wellness, or are we looking ahead to more remote online wellness?
I think definitely people are very aware of the social component of their well-being. So even in hospitality and the physical activity sector, and not to mention mental wellness, I think there are just definitely a lot of activities and probably business services and products to connect each other. So I think in-person wellness is really, really important, and people realize that. It's like in real life, you need to see people in real life. But I don't want to dismiss technology. Technology is really, really important for people who are not able to maybe have their community right next to them in person, when they need it. So an online community and being able to communicate, and have the solutions to do that, it's important. So I would say both. I wouldn't say like one versus the other.
And I would just want to add that we look a lot at community and the importance of community, and you'll be hearing more about that from both the Institute and the Summit coming up. I'm watching the time. Suleiman, please unmute and ask your question. We're running short on time.
This is Suleiman from Detroit. Very quick question. We are developing an app which is called Balanced Lifestyle, Mind, Body.
Okay, but what
and
is your
Soul.
question?
I'm coming to the question.
Okay.
Give me a chance. So does the Global Wellness Institute publish data on how many apps there are on balanced lifestyle? Thank you.
Thank you.
We track apps under different bubbles, for example under fitness and physical activity, but only in terms of putting kind of a dollar sign on it. What's the spending on apps related to that, or meditation apps? Unfortunately, it's impossible to track how many there are. I mean, there's new ones every day. So no, the answer is no, we don't have data on the exact number of apps in different categories. We just do a high level sort of spending numbers that are underneath other bubbles. There are a lot of companies out there that specialize in apps and tech data. You might be able to find things there.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Susie to unmute. Susie Ellis, Chair and CEO of the Institute and the Summit, and the person really responsible for implementing and driving research hard in this industry for validity in the early days, and how important that has become. Susie, over to you for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Catherine and Ophelia. We are so lucky to have you both, and we have also Joanne and Tonya. We have 4 people on our research team, and this research has been very, very valuable. And just addressing some of the comments, we can't measure everything, but our researchers measure a lot and valuable information, and now over 10 years. And so our hope has been right from the beginning, and I know that this is the case, that the momentum that's out there for wellness, and I think it's pretty major, especially since COVID, a lot of it has to do with the fact that there are some economic numbers out there that are reliable and can be trusted, so that people can make better decisions as they're growing their businesses. So I would just say that avail yourselves of the research. Go to the globalwellnessinstitute.org website. It's all there. Download it. And also, to the answer for one question about country data, that is something we have added with our geography of wellness country data reports. I think there are 12 countries now that for which we have data, but we need a country partner for that because it's a lot more work. So so watch for more of that, but that country data is also available to you online.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Catherine and Ophelia. I'm going to everybody unmute, and let's give Catherine and Ophelia a little global love.
Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray.
Yeah.
Hip, hip, hooray.
I love that.
Thank
you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone. And we will share the recording and the chat, and try to answer questions that were in the chat in a follow-up email. I can share quickly the slide where you can download the latest report. There's a QR code on there, but you can find all our research for free on our Global Wellness Institute page. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Blessings.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.